We're getting a better sense today of who will be vying for the leadership of the federal NDP. They haven't publicly announced their bids yet, but Elections Canada lists the International Longshore and Warehouse Union's Canadian President Rob Ashton and Alberta MP Heather McPherson as contestants. And today, we got the first public declaration that an approved candidate is entering the race. Filmmaker and activist Avi Lewis.
In the 1970s, my grandfather David Lewis, one of the founders of the NDP, said it well. The government and big business both hold hands in your pocket.
Well, as Avi Lewis mentioned there, he does have a significant family pedigree with the NDP. His father, Stephen, led the Ontario NDP in the 1970s, and his grandfather led the federal NDP right after Tommy Douglas resigned in 1971. Joining me now to discuss his leadership bid in 2025 is Avi Lewis. Avi Lewis, welcome to the show. It's good to see you, sir.
David, it's a pleasure to be Cochranized for the first time.
Well, welcome. You're following your father and your grandfather, I mean federal and provincial, but still leadership positions for the NDP. What are you hoping to do if you're successful as a leader of the federal party?
Restore the party's fortunes, restore a really strong voice in Canadian politics, which is clear, forthright, is able to diagnose the problems that we face. And I think the clip from my grandpa that you just played kind of nails it. And to be able to put forth solutions that are as big as the crises we face and actually advocate for the government to govern instead of just eternally incentivizing private corporations by giving them even more of our money and hoping that they'll solve the problems for us, which has led to a small number of corporations dominating every sector of our economy in a crisis and emergency of Canadians just trying to get by in an impossibly unfair economic moment.
Before you can execute that plan, you have to restore the party fortunes, as you said right off the top.
Right, I did start with that, yeah.
How do you do that, given the dynamic that played out and the very poor result we saw in the last federal election?
Yeah, it was an awful election. I think there was a moment, it was an historic moment when suddenly the fear of Trump surged and Canadians elected a government to protect us from Trump. But David, that was 143 days ago. I know because I've been building my leadership team and approach for 143 days since election night, and things are completely different now. I mean, we have a government, we have essentially a liberal conservative coalition passing the major pieces of legislation, which are fundamentally intended to change the nature of Canadian society. And I don't think we're actually talking about that. We have a militarization plan where Carney found $9 billion between June and April. But also the cupboard is bare and we're having 15% public spending cuts. And the plan is to ramp up to $150 billion of military spending a year. That's the equivalent of the entire education system to militarize our society. If we're going to go to war, I'm not aware of an army massing at our borders. Let's go to war against the everyday emergency of $300 for a cart of groceries, of more than $100 a month for a cell phone plan, and the cost of living emergency while corporate profits go skyward and billionaires build themselves rockets to the stars.
But what message do you take from the past election, and should the party take from the last election? That in this moment of threat from the South, voters abandoned the NDP. Pierre Poilievre won a lot of orange seats. He's got a lot of blue-collar, private sector union voters in particular. And a heck of a lot of voters went to the Carney Liberals. And there is a clustering around sort of the middle of Canadian politics now. So, what message should the NDP take from that outcome?
Well, I think we have to keep banging away at the actual emergency that we're talking about, and I think we did in the election, and I think it was an extraordinary election. And David, you've watched a few, and I don't think you can always fight the last election. We are going back to our base with humility. I'm running on a platform of re-democratizing, of democratic reform within the NDP. The base feels unsupported. It feels neglected. It wants to have a role in shaping policy and in being resourced to really organize at the riding level. That's an important part of it. But what we have is a unique capacity to correctly diagnose the problem that we face. There is a huge amount of money being made in Canada. It is not being made by workers who have bills to pay. And wages are not keeping up with the skyrocketing costs of living, which are going directly into corporate profits, which are immoral and they're insufferable. And somebody's got to express some outrage about that and propose things like a public option for food and groceries when the market has failed to deliver the basics of life to the majority of Canadians at an affordable level. We can't just be throwing more public money at corporations and hoping that they'll solve it. We need the government to actually govern. And that means instead of throwing a few $billions here and there to try to seed a housing revolution, we should have a public developer. The CMHC should have public construction companies and put thousands of Canadians to work actually building homes that are really affordable as a public option to solve the housing crisis. Think about a public internet and data plan for Canadians. You see how fast the big three, TELUS, Rogers, Bell,
Right.
most profitable corporations in Canada would suddenly find a way to offer these essential 21st century services at an affordable level. If we had a public option, only the NDP is going to do that. You know that.
Sure. Well, try to do it, because a lot of Canadians, the vast majority of Canadians either voted for the federal Liberals or voted for the federal Conservatives. There is an impulse to preserve the trade agreement with the United States, to preserve a lot of the private sector industries that do employ Canadians at good jobs. And you're talking about nationalizing huge parts of the Canadian economy.
I didn't say nationalizing. I talked about
public option. Excuse me.
But well, listen.
Sorry. Yes, I apologize for misframing.
$150 billion on the military. I think we need an electric bus revolution in Canada to reconnect the prairies that Greyhound abandoned, to actually make public transit a reality for people who have to go through the Hunger Games in order to get to work in the morning. And we can save the auto industry at the same time if the government devotes the resources that it is currently devoting to corporate welfare and all kinds of misguided priorities like ballooning military spending. There is plenty of money to provide the necessities of life to Canadians. It's a question of priorities and choices. And we are ready to put forward a vision of very different choices. And
yes, I apologize. Nationalizing was incorrect term, public option, and getting in. But
taking it off the table, David.
No. All right, no, but I didn't mean to misstate your position. But this is pushing into a space where like private home builders are saying they're having to lay people off because there's not enough housing starts, right? So you're pushing into a space where there's already a challenge for the existing private options to make a profit and to survive, right? So and criticizing a trade deal.
Supporting Canadians with good work. Look, we fought those free trade deals in the 80s and 90s because we said binding our economy to an economic neighbor 10 times bigger was never going to be to our advantage, and locking in the export of raw resources instead of developing manufacturing and tertiary production of our resources in this country was always going to be a bad idea. And now we're seeing how vulnerable it's made us to economic bullying from the United States. We have an opportunity right now to do things differently. You can't buy a refrigerator or washing machine, get my washing machine built in Canada.
Right, but
that's absurd.
But people want cheaper stuff, right?
Within 3 years. Yeah, but the thing is, we also need to bring back the manufacturing economy. And we need a green industrial strategy to actually create good unionized jobs, making Canada's economy more independent in food production, in manufacturing, in all kinds of things, in the care economy. David, there are 4.2 million people working in healthcare and education and long-term care and elder care. The actual work, mostly done by women, that holds our society together. You want a nation-building project? Pay those workers a fair wage and actually increase the care economy massively. As the population ages, we won $10 a day childcare in Canada. We had the legislation, we have the funding, and we don't have it in many provinces because we pay childcare workers like garbage. They should be making $35 to $40 an hour because they're taking care of precious children, and nothing is more important in society. That's the kind of nation-building project we need, and that's what we're going to be fighting for.
I need to ask you one final question. You're running for leader. You do not have a seat in Parliament, despite you've run, I think, the last 2 elections unsuccessfully. Heather McPherson does. She hasn't officially declared. What kind of a disadvantage is that for you? Is it a disadvantage? And the ability to get elected is a key part of doing any of the stuff you're promising to do, right? So how should NDP voters view that?
Well, listen, once we refund the CBC to really be able to afford a hologram guest, we could bring Jack Layton into my chair and ask him how he did it. Because when Jack ran, he had lost twice federally, and he ran for leader without a seat. So it's hardly unprecedented.
Right.
But yeah, I ran where I lived on a point of principle in communities where I was grounded and enmeshed, and they were both seats that the NDP had never won. and might be past that phase of choosing ridings. But I make no apology for the decisions that I made.
Okay. Avi Lewis, good luck. That's NDP leadership candidate Avi Lewis. We appreciate the time, sir. Talk to you soon.